Hello again. In this lesson we're going to be discussing how to handle events and set properties in code on the server. And we're going to talk again about the concept of PostBack and programmatically determine whether or not the current web request was a result of a PostBack or a first-time request. And we're going to talk about why that even matters. And then finally we're going to talk about the events that are at a more global level in nature at the session and application level. So if none of this makes sense, then you're in the right place. I'll try to explain all of this pretty thoroughly. Okay, so let's review some of the things that we said earlier about how events are handled in your application. All of the C# code that you write gets compiled into a .NET assembly. Individual .aspx pages contain a page directive at the very top which points to a specific class in the .NET assembly that's created. So when a page request is made, the ASP.NET Runtime Engine sends along information about whether this is a first-time request or whether it's the result of a postback, as well as which event caused the postback, like a button click, for example. It then delivers the web request to the event handler, which is where you write the logic for your website. Now in the first lesson we talked briefly about how the page is then constructed and then passed back to the web browser that requested it. So there's three things that can affect the output. First of all, obviously the HTML in the .aspx page. Then secondly, the server control tags in the .aspx page. Recall that we said in the previous lesson that those are stripped out by the ASP.NET Runtime Engine and replaced with HTML code that's appropriate for the given web browser that's requesting the page. And then thirdly, any modifications that are made to the server controls as events are handled within the .NET assembly for the website. So if you're still with me, you can forget what I just said. Just take comfort in the fact that it works. But you can know sure well that ASP.NET handles the heavy lifting, allowing you to focus on the business functionality and the logic of your applications. So why did I bring all this up about PostBack in the first place? Well, there's two reasons. First of all, PostBack is very cool because it helps create the illusion that the user is working on a robust, full-featured application as opposed to working with just another website. In other words, it enables a more interactive experience that is responsive, not just to button-click events similar to submitting a form, but also to respond on the server to small events on the web page, like the selection of an item from a drop-down list box like we saw in the previous lesson, or clicking on a checkbox. At that point, we can interact with the user and change what the user sees on the screen, give him information, or give him a different web page. So if we were to try to do that without ASP.NET, it would require a lot of custom JavaScript coding, but fortunately, ASP.NET does all this for you, and we don't even have to write any code to make it happen. We just have to set a few properties. The second reason to talk extensively about PostBack is because there's a few instances where PostBack can actually be your enemy, and you could spend days trying to figure out why you have this strange little bug in your application. So let's do this. What I've done here is created a new website called Lesson 03, and as you can see, I've already taken the liberty of setting this example up by dragging and dropping two text boxes and a button control from my toolbox onto my designer surface. And I've left all the default properties the same. I haven't changed anything up to this point. So let's do this. Let's tackle the easy part. We've already done this in the previous two lessons, but we've really just accepted it at face value, and that is the setting of properties of our ASP.NET server controls in code. So we can do something like this whenever we double-click the button and get into the C# code editor, where we're actually writing C# code in the code behind for our given web form. And let's start out by clicking textbox2.text, and notice first of all that I get the full IntelliSense whenever I'm working with the C# code editor. Now, while there's just a few properties of a text box, or any control for that matter, that I might ever want to change, the fact is that I can set or get every property of a given control. So there's a lot of power available to us programmatically within our web form applications. And then also, as I pointed out in the first video, we get that full IntelliSense that shows us all the properties. And the nice thing is that we really get a true C# code editor. We don't get any shortcuts. We get the full thing with all the benefits that we would get if we were using Visual C# 2005 Express Edition or Visual Studio. So let's continue this example and just finish it up here. .text. And you can see what I'm simply doing here in this very simple example is taking the value, whatever somebody types in the first text box, and I'm going to place it in the second text box. I'm doing this for a reason, so let's just set this example up and demonstrate how it works. So I can type anything here, and I click the button, I get a PostBack, and notice then that it is programmatically entered into our second text box. Okay, pretty obvious stuff so far. So let's do this now. Just as we have a form load event available to us whenever we're creating Windows Forms applications, we also have a page load event in ASP.NET web form applications that fires each time a page is requested from a web browser. So we might use this for initialization purposes in order to set default values and so forth. And the trick is that this event fires every single time the page is loaded, even if the page is posted back 1, 2, 3 or more times. So this is where things can get kind of sticky. Let's do this. Let's add some code with the intent of initializing the text box's text to an empty string, which is seemingly a fairly innocuous example, right? Whenever we open up our page, we want to make sure that there's nothing placed in our text box 1. So let's now run our application and see how this works. I'm going to type in some values here. I'm going to click the button. And then notice that not only do I not get anything in text box 2, but everything in text box 1 gets cleared out as well. And the reason this occurs is because we've got kind of bitten by PostBack and writing code in our page load event. The key here is that we have to pay attention to the order in which the events are executing on our web page, which can be a challenge not only while we're writing Windows applications, but now also with web form applications as well. Now the good news is that we can check for this condition by checking whether or not the page is being loaded for the first time or whether it's being loaded as a result of a postback. And the way that we do that is through the property of the page object called isPostback. The page object contains a bunch of useful properties and methods pertaining to the current request and response for the current page. So let's do this. Let's add some code to this example in our page load event. So here we'll go if page.isPostback equals false, then so what will this do? We're checking to see whether this page is being posted back. If it's not being posted back, in other words, if this page is being loaded for the first time, then we will empty out the text box. Otherwise, we'll skip line 17 and not execute that line. So now let's try our example, since we've made that change. And it works again. Plus, we get the benefit of being able to initialize our values here in the page load. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about in this lesson is the lifetime of the web applications. Now, the first time a request from a web browser is made for any page within our website project, an object called the application is created and maintained by the ASP.NET Runtime Engine. This application object contains information that is global to the entire website, regardless of how many people access it or how many pages are contained in it. When the application has been inactive for a long period of time, or when the website has been stopped at the web server, the application object is removed from the computer's memory. Similarly, each time a new user accesses a website, a session object is created for that user. A session can span multiple requests by a single user, but after a period of inactivity, let's say like for example by default I think it's 20 minutes, the session object is destroyed from the web server's computer memory. Now we'll revisit the application and session objects several times throughout the series of lessons. However, since we're talking about events right now, let's talk about how to handle the 4 events that are triggered when the application starts and when it ends, and when a new session starts and when it ends. Now there's a special file that we can add to our website that will contain the events that occur at this global level, and it's called the global.asax file. So let's go ahead and select our project, and then we can select Add Item from our toolbar. And we're going to find this global application class from the Add New Item dialog. We're going to leave it named global.asax. We're not going to change the name. We're going to leave the language of C#, and then we'll click the Add button. And you can see here that what it has are several event handlers, including an application start event, and you can see the comment here, that code that runs on application startup. We have the application end event when the application is shut down, and at the bottom we have a session start and a session end as well. We also have an application error. We'll talk about this later in the series of lessons, how to create a global error handler or exception handler for your application. Okay, so what can we do with these 4 global events that occur? Well, in the case of the start events, both the application start and the session start, we can initialize any objects that are global to our application or our session, respectively. We can, for example, use the application object or the session object in order to save information in their respective internally managed collection of values, and we'll show how to do that in just a moment. In the case of the end events, both application end and session end, we can then perform any cleanup, so removing items from our computer's memory, setting them equal to null, storing the current state of either a user's data or of the application's data back into the database before it shuts down, things of that nature. So they do have some use. Let me show you one quick way that we can gain some benefit from writing some code behind the session start and session end event that will allow us to keep track of the current number of users that are working with our website. So as I said a moment ago, the application and session objects both have an internally managed collection so that I can add some values. Think of these as like variables that are available in the case of the application to every user of every web page of our website. So in this case, I'm going to create a variable, or rather just an item in my global collection at the application level called user count. And we'll initialize that value to 0 in our application start. Then let's go down here to our session start. And first of all, what I want to do is whenever a new user comes to our website, we're going to increment that user count by 1. So the first thing we'll have to do is get that value, retrieve it from our application collection. So we'll do get, and we'll pass in the name of our little variable here, user count, a little identifier. Now we're going to need to do a little bit of data conversion on this because this is going to return it to us in an object form. So we're going to have to do a toString on this and then convert this string to an integer. So this is a little bit messy, but this is not unlike what you may have to write whenever you're dealing with values that are stored in a way that we need to convert for our usage. So here we're going to do user count, and then we're going to increment it by using the double plus sign operator. And then here we're going to do the set. So we're going to do application dot set, and here's where we can store values back in. So user count will reference that particular element of our collection again, and now set it to user count, our local variable. Now let's do the same thing for the session end. So here we go, int user count equals int.parse application get user count dot toString, and then we'll do user count. Need to make sure that the capitalization is correct there. And then application.set user count, passing in our local variable user count. Okay, so now whenever a session starts or ends, we're going to increment or decrement the user count element of our application object that we created. Then within our pages, we want to display the current application, the user count within our web page. So what we can do, just for a quick, easy way of writing a value to a web page, we can get access to that particular page's response stream by accessing the page.responseObject.write. And so again, this is just going to, whatever we put in here will be written out to the response stream. We could write in HTML, we could just write values. Whatever we put in here will actually get written to the top of the body of our web page. So response.write, and we'll pass in user count, and then here we will do something like this: application.get user count.toString. All right, so hopefully that will work if we did this right. So now we'll run our application. Looks like we got a little error here. Let's see what we have. Okay, it looks like we have one too many parentheses at the end of this line. Sorry about that. Let's go ahead and run it again. Looks like it's going to work this time. Okay, notice at the very top how we get user count of 1. Now let's open up another session by opening up another web browser, and we're going to copy this URL and paste it into the new web browser, and we get user count of 2. Now if we waited around long enough so that the sessions expire in memory, then we would see this user count begin to drop down back to 0 at some point once both of the sessions expire. Okay, so after this lesson, I hope you're getting a better handle on how to handle the various events, not only the events that occur directly as a result of a user's interaction with your web page, but also some of the specialized events like the page load, which we looked at, and also the more global events that occur within the lifetime of our applications and our users' sessions. So we talked about how PostBack works and how the ASP.NET Runtime Engine knows how to pass along a notification to the event handler that should execute based on the postback of a control that's fired by the end user's web browser. We also talked about a special event called the page load, and we discussed how to programmatically check to see whether the page request was due to an original request or whether it was a postback, and then write code accordingly. And then finally we talked about the concepts of application and session and how to write code for the major events in the life of an application and each session. And we looked at the application object itself and how it manages a collection of values internally that we can essentially create global variables that are accessible across all the users on our site and all of the pages that are available to all of our users. Hope you enjoyed this video. Please visit www.learnvisualstudio.net to download and watch over 400 videos just like this one, aimed at all skill levels on many different topics related to C#, Visual Basic, ASP.NET, and more. Thank you.